Existence is not a gift, but a fact, cold, unchosen, and irrevocable. You wake within it, as though cast into a theater already in motion, with no script, no exit, and no audience beyond your own weary reflection. Before thought begins, suffering waits. Not as punishment, not as accident, but as the very condition of being. The infant screams not from trauma, but from arrival. This is the first truth. To be is to strain against the silence, to hunger without reason, to hurt without offense. Every heartbeat is a quiet protest against the void. Desire rises like mist from the ground of consciousness, formless and restless. It seeks, always seeks, but never finds. This is its nature, not to arrive, but to pursue. What you want today is what you thought you needed yesterday, and what you shall discard tomorrow. The moment you grasp, it dissolves. The will is a wheel with no axle, turning through illusions of fulfillment that vanish upon contact. You chase wealth, love, acclaim, not because they hold substance, but because the emptiness within demands distraction. The pursuit becomes a ritual, not a resolution. The object is irrelevant. It is the wanting itself that devours you. Modernity promises noise, lights, infinite options. It offers pixels in place of presence, affirmations instead of understanding. Everything is immediate, but nothing is intimate. You are surrounded by reflections of other people's desires, curated fragments of their longing dressed as joy. Comparison becomes the altar where the soul is sacrificed. The world whispers, you are behind, you are less, you are failing. And so you run harder, scroll faster, consume louder, all to silence the ancient ache that no algorithm can reach. Pain is path, not punishment. Suffering unmasks the illusion of control. When the body fails, when the lover leaves, when the future collapses into ash, you are returned to the raw edge of being. It is here, in this stripped silence, that the false gods fall away. No affirmation soothes, no plan holds. The self you built fractures, and in this fracturing, a strange clarity emerges. Nothing was ever yours, nothing could ever be secured, and nothing needed to be. The tragedy is not that life ends, but that we spend it trying to avoid its nature. Detachment is not apathy, it is the discipline of no longer clinging, of watching the parade of phenomena with soft eyes and an ungrasping hand. It is not withdrawal, but a deepening, a presence that rests beneath the drama, unshaken. When you no longer expect life to fulfill you, you become strangely free. Not joyous, that is another form of longing, but still. Like a tree that does not chase the wind, but bends with it. Like water that takes the shape of each vessel, but never becomes trapped within it. Love, too, is a mirror. What you seek in another is what you fear you lack. You do not fall in love with the other, you fall in love with the feeling they awaken in you. And so, attachment breeds suffering, not because love is cruel, but because it is mistaken for possession. We long to be completed, not realizing we are incomplete by design. No one can carry your sorrow for you, no one can silence the will that pulses beneath your skin. The one who stands beside you is a fellow fugitive, not your salvation, but your companion in the storm. The ego constructs its fortress out of names, roles, achievements, all destined to rot. You become a resume, a timeline, a collection of memories filtered through nostalgia and regret. But beneath this costume, there is no self as we understand it, only awareness, naked and impersonal. The I is a flame flickering on the winds of time. To know this is not to despair, but to stop pretending. To stop defending the mask, to let it fall, and to meet the void not as enemy, but as truth. The world does not owe you happiness. Existence is not organized for your comfort. What happens to you is not personal, because there is no fixed you for it to happen to. Events arise, sensations pass, identities dissolve. You are not the author, but the page. Not the voice, but the silence that listens. This is the discipline of wanting nothing, the end of the chase, the stillness at the heart of surrender. Not resignation in defeat, but recognition of futility. The soul that sees clearly does not scream. It does not protest. It watches the fire consume the house and does not flee, for it knows the house was made of straw. It sees death not as thief, but as liberator. It meets suffering not as punishment, but as the unveiling of illusion. And in that unbearable honesty, there is peace, not of emotion, but of cessation, like music that fades into silence and leaves the echo of its absence as a final, sacred offering. Here, at the edge of striving, you find not a new beginning, but the absence of needing one. You stop chasing meaning like a ghost in the fog. You let the river flow, not toward a destination, but because it flows. The discipline of wanting nothing is not a philosophy. It is a funeral for the dream of control, for the myth of fulfillment, for the child within who thought the world was kind. And from that burial rises not hope, but awareness, cold, unadorned and merciful in its clarity. There is no conclusion, for there is nothing to conclude. Only this breath, this moment, this unchosen truth unfolding like a slow-burning candle in the long night. And the silence that follows it, not empty, but eternal. Suffering is not a shadow cast upon life. It is life's light, inverted. To live is to strain against the weight of existence, to bear a burden no one chose, yet all must carry. Each moment of pleasure is only the brief suspension of torment, a pause in the gnawing hunger that defines the will. Even in laughter, there is a tremor, the knowledge that it cannot last, that beneath every joy lies the aching pool of its loss. We do not suffer because something is wrong. We suffer because we are conscious, and consciousness is the wound through which the world bleeds. What the world calls happiness is merely the relief of pain. A thirst quenched, a fear momentarily soothed, a longing briefly fulfilled before another arises. It is a cycle without summit, a staircase that turns endlessly back upon itself. You do not arrive, you merely pass from one craving to the next, like a ghost moving through fog, mistaking motion for meaning. Every new desire is a reminder that the last was insufficient. Every achievement reveals the emptiness it was meant to conceal. What we call progress is only the escalation of illusion. The spectacle of modern life is a theater of distraction, designed not to reveal truth, but to drown it. Technology hums like a lullaby over the abyss, offering infinite screens, infinite noise, infinite forms of forgetting. We do not seek truth in this age, we seek anesthesia. The glowing devices in our hands are not instruments of knowledge, but barriers against reflection. In the flood of constant connection, we become strangers to ourselves, exiles from silence. The more we try to connect, the more we scatter. The more we accumulate, the more we dissolve. Loneliness is not cured by company. The soul cannot be touched by another hand. At the center of every life is an unbridgeable solitude, a stillness no voice can reach. Even love, that most exalted of illusions, crumbles when burdened with the impossible demand to make us whole. The beloved is not a remedy, but a mirror, reflecting our hunger, our fear, our desperate wish to escape ourselves. When they fail to complete us as they must, we call it heartbreak. But the heart was already broken, long before the other arrived. To detach is not to flee, but to see clearly, to recognize the mirage without chasing it, to feel the ache without wrapping it in narratives. Detachment is not coldness, it is tenderness stripped of delusion. It watches the drama unfold and does not step onto the stage. It grieves, but does not grasp. It loves, but does not cling. It loses, but does not despair. Like the moon reflecting on the water, it remains untouched by the ripples beneath. The will, that ceaseless engine of craving, is the architect of agony. It drives you forward, whispering that just beyond the next hill lies peace. And when you reach it, it moves the horizon once more. There is no still point while the will reigns. It cannot be satisfied, only silenced not through conquest, but through surrender. This is the path the world fears most. Not more, but less. Not acquisition, but abdication. To want nothing is not to have nothing, but to no longer believe that having will save you. All structures collapse, all names fade. The empire, the ideology, the self-image, all dissolve under the weight of impermanence. Death is not the interruption of life, but its fulfillment. Every breath leans toward it. Every step is in its direction. To deny death is to deny life's very shape. It is the boundary that gives meaning to the void. When you cease to fear it, you cease to need anything from life. You no longer beg it for answers. You simply walk with it, not as enemy, but as the silent companion who tells no lies. There is no redemption in the world's terms, no culmination, no climax where suffering reveals itself to have been necessary for some hidden glory. The story does not resolve, the meaning does not arrive. But in this void, a deeper calm takes root, not the peace of victory, but the stillness of seeing. Seeing that you are never lost, only reaching for things that were never yours to hold. Seeing that life asks nothing from you but your presence, your breath, your willingness to face it without disguise. Let this clarity fall like snow on the frantic machinery of the mind. Let it settle, let it mute the noise. There is nothing to become, nothing to fix, nothing to wait for. Only this moment, this breath, this silence, quietly refusing to promise more than what is. To suffer is to awaken. The animal lives in pain, but does not know it. Only man, burdened with reflection, turns his agony into awareness. This is both his curse and his only truth. The moment you see your suffering, you are torn from the dream of innocence. The veil lifts. No longer can you move through the world as if it were built for you, as if joy were your birthright and meaning your inheritance. The curtain rises not on purpose, but on futility, and yet in that unveiling lies the first quiet step toward lucidity. You look around and find the world full of motion, all of it urgent, all of it empty. The multitudes rush past each other in pursuit of nothing that can last, each one clutching at mirages, chasing shadows dressed as hope. They call it ambition, but it is panic. They name it purpose, but it is hunger. Beneath the smiles, the polished surfaces, the self-congratulating rituals of progress, lies the same unspoken despair. We do not know why we live, but we are too afraid to stop. The will drives forward, not because it knows, but because it cannot rest. All striving is a confession. To want is to admit lack. To pursue is to concede emptiness. We clothe our desperation in noble words, growth, evolution, self-actualization, but they are only veils for the same ancient wound, the feeling that something is missing. We run toward wealth, not because it fulfills, but because it distracts. We chase relationships, not to share being, but to shield ourselves from the loneliness that being exposes. We work, we plan, we build futures, not to embrace life, but to escape it. The more we possess, the less we see. The more we promise ourselves, the less we remember what silence feels like. Even memory betrays us. What you recall is not the past, but a story shaped by longing. You do not remember what was, but what you needed it to be. Nostalgia is the perfume of the will, sweetening the decay of what was never whole. You gaze backward and see moments tinted in gold, forgetting the restlessness that haunted even those supposed joys. You dream of return, not because the place was good, but because you were younger, more forgetful, less aware of the prison walls tightening around your breath. Time is not a river flowing forward. It is a wound that widens as it deepens. And yet we insist on purpose. We must. To admit otherwise would leave us suspended over the abyss without narrative, without disguise. And so we fashion stories, gods, movements, identities, anything that might give structure to the unbearable openness of life. The religious man finds meaning in surrender. The secular man finds it in achievement. But both are seeking the same balm, the illusion of coherence. One prays to silence, the other to progress. Neither escapes the hunger that drives them. Neither dares to face the possibility that life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a void to be seen. You are not the author of your thoughts. They arrive uninvited, surge like waves through a body you did not choose. You are not the owner of your fate. The place of your birth, the shape of your face, the temperament of your soul were handed to you like a sentence. And yet you are told to craft your destiny, to optimize your life, to manifest your dreams. But the dreamer is a phantom, the dream a repetition of desires that were never yours to begin with. Freedom, in the modern tongue, means more choices, but choice without stillness is just a louder kind of bondage. And what of love, that sacred torment? The one thing still worshipped, even in the age of disenchantment. But love, too, is intoxication, the will dressing itself in beauty. You fall in love not with a person, but with the sensation they awaken. You call it intimacy, but it is projection, the old hunger painted with a new face. For a time, you forget your solitude. For a time, you mistake fusion for freedom, but the other cannot complete you because you are not incomplete. You are misaligned, believing that what is unbearable within you can be softened by merging with another storm. Soon, even that passion turns. The lover becomes the mirror of your disillusionment. Their flaws, once charming, become burdens. Their presence, once salvation, becomes suffocating. And so, you begin again or you retreat. Not because you are wicked, but because the will moves on. It always does. What it once adored, it now finds stale. What once felt like wholeness now tastes like repetition. And the cycle renews longing, grasping, disillusionment, withdrawal. Love is not the answer. It is the question that leads you to the deeper silence underneath all answers. That silence is the beginning of detachment. Not the cold abandonment of life, but the soft recognition that nothing in it belongs to you. The faces you adore, the goals you pursue, the identity you defend, all are passing weather. To detach is to cease claiming what never was yours. It is to see everything arise and vanish without tightening the fist. It is to breathe in suffering and not demand its meaning. To sit beside sorrow and not insist upon its redemption. Detachment is not the death of feeling. It is the end of delusion. To live with this awareness is to walk in a world of sleepwalkers with open eyes. You see the rituals, the ambitions, the parades of meaning-making, and you do not mock them, you understand them. They are necessary, perhaps even beautiful, but no longer persuasive. You do not scream at the dreamer to awaken, you simply do not join the dance. There is a loneliness in this, seeing a loneliness without remedy, but it is honest. It does not ask to be solved. It only asks to be felt. And what remains, once illusion falls away? Stillness. Not the stillness of stone, but of clarity. A stillness that feels neither triumphant nor defeated, but present. The will quiets not through conquest, but exhaustion. It burns itself out, and what is left is the space in which you can finally breathe. Not because the world changes, but because your clinging to it dissolves. You walk through the same streets, but they no longer demand you conquer them. You sit in the same body, but it no longer cries for improvement. You live, but you no longer expect life to validate your being. This is not enlightenment, it is not transcendence, it is sobriety, spiritual sobriety. A gaze that no longer seeks visions, a heart that no longer bargains with the infinite. The saints were not victorious, they were broken, not into pieces, but into truth. They wanted nothing, not because they had everything, but because they saw through everything. And in that emptiness, they found peace. Not the peace of arrival, but the peace of no longer departing. Everything ends, every breath, every form, every illusion. The body decays, the name fades, the story dissolves. The ego, that constant narrator, falls silent in death, and the world continues as if you were never here. This is not tragedy, it is freedom. To accept your disappearance is to finally be free of the need to be seen. To no longer insist upon significance is to taste the calm of insignificance. Not apathy, but equanimity. Not despair, but rest. Let this settle in your bones, the truth that there is nothing to fix, nothing to achieve, nothing to become. You are not a project, you are a presence. And your presence does not require a purpose to be real. The world is not a riddle to solve, but a mirror to stand before. What you see may terrify you, or bore you, or sadden you, but it is yours to see. And in that seeing, without agenda, something ancient begins to stir, not hope, but freedom from hope. Not joy, but freedom from needing joy. You return, then, not to life as it should be, but to life as it is. The sky still gray, the body still aching, the future still uncertain, but you are no longer asking it to be otherwise. You walk quietly now. You speak only when words arise. You let others chase, while you observe, not with superiority, but with sorrow. A sorrow that no longer wounds, but softens. The sorrow of one who has seen too much to pretend, and too deeply to flee. This is the discipline of wanting nothing. not through effort, but through surrender. Not by rising above the world, but by sinking fully into its emptiness and finding that emptiness is not a lack, but a space in which everything passes and nothing needs to remain, a space in which suffering reveals its quiet secret, that it, too, is just a form of longing, asking only to be seen and no longer believed. The candle burns lower now, the silence deepens, and in that silence you hear not the promise of peace, but the absence of striving, not the voice of the soul, but the stillness that cradles it. And this is enough, not because it fulfills, but because it ends the hunger to be fulfilled. And the flame flickers, not out of fear, but because it was never meant to last. There is a peculiar dignity in renouncing hope, not the loud despair that demands attention, but the silent laying down of arms in the face of life's unwinnable war. The soul, when it stops bargaining with fate, becomes like a sky emptied of clouds, not radiant, but vast. All that once clung to it, ambition, romance, legacy, drifts away, not with a crash, but with a sigh. You are not defeated, because you are no longer playing the game. You have stepped off the board, and the pieces continue to move without you, locked in their mechanical dance. The world goes on, unaware that you have let go. It continues its rituals, its proclamations, its infinite chatter about success and meaning and becoming, but you no longer answer its call. The billboard shouts, the sermon pleads, the algorithm pulses, but you, at last, have grown deaf to it all. This detachment is not cold, it is compassionate. You no longer ask others to fulfill the role of savior, no longer burden them with the task of curing your aloneness. They are drifting sparks, just as you are, flames in the same night, flickering for a time, then fading. You look into the mirror and no longer expect to find someone worth rescuing. You see a face that has wept, a body that has endured, eyes that have watched illusions rise and collapse. You no longer dress it up for the world. You do not seek admiration, for admiration is merely another mask the world wears to delay seeing itself. Praise and blame no longer alter your course. The praise feeds the ego's hunger, the blame stirs its defensiveness, but when the ego itself falls away, both become echoes in an empty hall. Time loses its sharpness. The past no longer binds, the future no longer beckons. You cease measuring yourself against what was or what might be. The clock still ticks, but its voice grows faint. You feel no urgency to arrive. Arrival was always an illusion, a mirage promised by the merchants of desire. What you sought was never at the destination, because it never existed beyond the seeking itself. Now you simply move not toward, not away, but with, like dust in a sunbeam, like the tide meeting the shore. There is tenderness now, strange and unpossessed. You feel the sorrow of others, but do not interfere. Their path is theirs, their pain, their own initiation. You do not try to heal, for healing presumes there is something wrong. You do not try to save, for salvation is another myth we use to make suffering tolerable. You offer presence, not advice, silence, not solutions, and sometimes rarely, quietly, this stillness is more nourishing than all the frantic attempts to mend what was never broken, only misunderstood. Even beauty, once consumed as an escape, becomes something different. You do not chase it, you let it pass through you. A leaf trembling in the wind, the slow movement of clouds across dusk, they do not entertain, they do not inspire, they remind of transience, of softness, of the world's quiet indifference, and the strange peace that arises when we no longer demand it to care. You do not want to possess beauty anymore. You simply allow it to wound you gently and then move on. Pain still comes, it always will. The body fails, friends depart, love decays. But now you meet it differently. You do not panic. You do not ask, why me? You already know. Pain is not special. It is the signature of being. To hurt is to be alive in this flesh, and you no longer recoil from it. You cradle the pain like an old companion, not with affection, but with understanding. You no longer believe it is unjust. You simply let it be, and in doing so, you are no longer ruled by it. The hunger for identity fades. You no longer need to define yourself. You cease to ask who you are. The question becomes meaningless. You are not a fixed point, not a brand, not a narrative. You are this seeing, this breathing, this being, and that is enough. The need to be known, to be understood, to be admired, these melt like frost under the gaze of awareness. You are not less without them. You are simply not confined by the walls they once built. You walk more slowly now, not because you are weary, but because there is nowhere to reach. Each step is its own destination. The path is not a means to an end, but the shape life takes when it is no longer forced. You no longer try to optimize. You no longer ask if this moment is enough. It is what it is. And that is the only standard that matters. Utility has lost its throne. Efficiency is no longer sacred. You live not to do more, but to need less. What once frightened you now calms you. The thought of death does not disturb, it soothes. Not because you desire it, but because you no longer resist it. It is not an enemy, but a horizon, the place where the story stops pretending. You do not rush toward it, nor do you flee. You carry it with you, like a secret, like a seed. It keeps you humble. It makes everything transparent. In its presence, all masks fall away, and what remains is not dread, but release. There is a kind of grace in living this way. Not the grace of angels or doctrines, but the grace of gravity. You are pulled toward the earth, and you do not struggle. You fall, but it is not failure. It is flight turned inward. You no longer reach for the heavens. You listen to the ground. You find in its silence a wisdom that speaks not in words, but in weight. To be heavy is to be real. To sink is not to die, but to stop floating. This is not a life of ecstasy. It is not the heroic journey the poets promise. It is a life without adornment, without applause, a life stripped bare of fantasies. But it is honest, and there is beauty in that honesty, a beauty no pleasure can match, no philosophy can fully express. It is the beauty of truth undisturbed by desire, the stillness of a soul that wants nothing and so is bound by nothing. You sit, at last, with yourself, not to improve, not to analyze, simply to be. And in that being there is no lack, no purpose, no climax, just the soft unfolding of what is, as it is, needing no witness, fearing no end. The flame grows low, but the room is still. There is nothing to be done, and that, finally, is enough. The candle is nearly spent. Its flame, once restless, now leans inward, as if it, too, has grown tired of dancing. The light no longer fights the dark. It folds into it, not as defeat, but as return. There is nothing to fear in this ending, for the ending is not a rupture. It is the natural breath that follows the last word of a sentence never truly begun. The silence that was always here, waiting beneath every noise, every desire, every cry for more. You sit alone, but not abandoned. The world continues around you, but it no longer presses in. Its noise is a distant wind across a barren plain. You are not untouched by sorrow, but you are no longer pierced by it. It moves through you like rain through branches present, but passing. Even pain becomes soft when it is no longer resisted. Even loss becomes gentle when you no longer demand permanence. You see now that the agony was never in the thing itself, but in the refusal to let it go. And so you let it all go. Not in gesture, not in ritual, but in stillness. The names, the faces, the ambitions, they dissolve like ink in water. Not erased, but no longer separate. You do not clutch, you do not reach, you do not wish. What comes, comes. What stays, stays. What leaves, leaves. There is no longer a center that must hold. There is only this breath and the space into which it vanishes. This moment and the vastness that contains it without preference. You remember now not the events of your life, but the feeling of having lived. Not the story, but the weight. The subtle ache that was always there, beneath every joy, like a shadow stitched to light. And you do not try to make sense of it. There is no moral, no final triumph, no redemptive arc. The suffering was not a teacher. The journey was not a test. It was simply what it was, an echo in an empty chamber, a dream that knew it was dreaming. Even the will, that ancient tyrant, begins to fade. It no longer commands, it no longer pleads, it exhales, and with that breath, its dominion ends. You are not beyond suffering, but you are no longer its subject. You walk with it like an old companion who no longer needs to be convinced. It walks beside you without threat. It, too, has grown silent. This is the final discipline, not to want nothing as an act of defiance, but to discover that nothing is left to want. The hunger is spent, the voice that cried out for more has fallen asleep, and what remains is not absence, but presence unadorned, unclaimed, untouched by need. The world does not weep for your withdrawal, it does not notice, but the soul, at last, is unburdened, and in that unburdening, a strange clarity. You were never meant to become anything, you were only meant to see without grasping, to feel without owning, to exist without conclusion. And now, the final breath. Not special, not sacred, just breath, just stillness. Just the soft surrender to the nameless truth that was always here, beneath the noise, beneath the self, beneath the longing to be more. And it ends not with a cry, but with the disappearance of the one who cried.